Have you ever discovered that the person you hired to clean your home was actually fighting to survive in ways you never imagined? My name is Nathan Blackwell, and 3 years ago, I thought I knew everything about loss. I was wrong. I knew nothing about loss until I understood what it meant to almost lose the chance at love itself. This is the story of how a woman named Clara Santos taught me that sometimes the greatest treasures are hidden in the most broken places, and that love has a way of finding us when we least expect it. It was a Tuesday morning in late October when I first noticed something was different about Clara. The autumn leaves were falling outside my office window in Greenwich, Connecticut, painting the grounds of my estate in shades of amber and gold. I sat at my mahogany desk, pretending to read quarterly reports, while my mind wandered to places I tried desperately to avoid. I had been widowed for 2 years by then, and my daughter Lily, who was 6 years old, had finally stopped asking when Mommy was coming home. The silence that replaced those questions was somehow worse than the questions themselves had been. My wife, Rebecca, had died suddenly on a morning that had started like any other. An aneurysm, the doctors said, as if giving it a name could somehow make sense of the senseless. One moment, she was laughing at something Lily had said over breakfast, her blonde hair catching the morning light, her blue eyes crinkling at the corners the way they always did when she found something genuinely amusing. And the next moment, she was on the floor, already gone before I could reach her, before the paramedics could arrive, before I could say goodbye or tell her one more time that she was the best thing that had ever happened to me. I remember standing in the emergency room, holding Lily in my arms, trying to explain to a 4-year-old that the world as we knew it had just ended. How do you tell a child that young that her mother is never coming back? How do you explain death to someone who still believes in fairy tales and happy endings? I don't remember what words I used. I only remember the weight of her small body against my chest, the dampness of her tears soaking through my shirt, and the hollow feeling that had taken up residence in my chest and never left. For 2 years, I had operated on autopilot. I ran my investment firm with the same precision I always had, maybe even more so, because work was the one place where I could pretend that everything was normal, where spreadsheets and market analyses didn't care that my heart had been ripped from my chest. I attended Lily's school functions and sat in the audience with the other parents, smiling when expected and applauding at the appropriate moments. I hired nannies and housekeepers, a revolving door of women who never stayed long because I couldn't bear their sympathy or their attempts at conversation. I smiled when expected and spoke when necessary. But inside I was hollow, a man going through the motions of living without actually being alive. My mother kept telling me that Rebecca would have wanted me to move on, to find happiness again. She would say it over Sunday dinners that I attended out of obligation, her eyes full of concern as she watched me push food around my plate. I always nodded and changed the subject, asking about her garden or her book club or anything that would steer the conversation away from my dead wife and my empty heart. How do you explain to someone that moving on feels like betrayal? That every moment of joy feels like a knife in your gut because she's not there to share it? That sometimes I went entire days without smiling and felt guilty when I finally did? Clara had been working for me for about 4 months when everything changed. She was different from the housekeepers who had come before her, though it took me a while to notice just how different. The agency had sent me 3 others in the 2 years since Rebecca's death, and none of them had lasted more than a few weeks. Mrs. Patterson had been too invasive, asking too many questions about my late wife, wanting to know why I kept her clothes in the closet and her perfume on the dresser. She had suggested, gently but persistently, that it might be time to pack those things away, and I had fired her the next day. The second one, a young woman whose name I can't even remember now, had been too detached, treating my home like just another job, never making eye contact with Lily, never noticing when the child needed something more than food and clean clothes. The third had quit after 2 weeks, citing the oppressive atmosphere of the house, and I couldn't even blame her. But Clara was different. Clara was neither invasive nor detached. She was simply present. She was quiet, almost invisible in the way she moved through the house. I would look up from my desk and realize she had already cleaned the study without me hearing her enter or leave. I would come down for breakfast and find the kitchen spotless, fresh coffee waiting, and no sign of how it had gotten that way. She was in her early 30s, with dark hair that she always kept pulled back in a simple ponytail, and brown eyes that seemed to hold stories she never told. There was something in those eyes, a depth of experience that seemed at odds with her quiet demeanor. She wore the same rotation of modest clothes, always clean and pressed, but clearly worn. The kind of clothes that had been washed so many times the colors had faded. She arrived exactly at 7 in the morning and left at 4 in the afternoon. And in between, she transformed my house into something that almost felt like a home again. It wasn't anything dramatic or obvious, it was the small things. The way she arranged fresh flowers on the dining table, even though I never asked her to. The way she remembered that Lily liked her sandwiches cut diagonally and her apple slices with the skin removed. The way she hummed while she worked. Soft melodies that I didn't recognize, but that somehow made the silence of the house feel less oppressive. For the first time in 2 years, the house didn't feel like a mausoleum dedicated to my dead wife. It felt like a place where people actually lived. It was Lily who noticed her first. Really noticed her, I mean, in the way that children notice things that adults are too busy or too broken to see. My daughter had become withdrawn after her mother's death, preferring to play alone in her room rather than interact with anyone. She had stopped asking for playdates, stopped begging to go to the park, stopped doing all the things that 6-year-olds were supposed to do. Her teachers had expressed concern, suggesting therapy, suggesting that she needed more engagement, more connection. I had nodded and agreed, and then done nothing because I barely had enough energy to get through each day myself, let alone help my daughter navigate her grief. But one afternoon in late October, I came home early from the office. There had been a problem with a major account, and I had spent 3 hours in meetings that accomplished nothing, and by 2 o'clock, I couldn't take it anymore. I told my assistant I was working from home for the rest of the day and drove through the autumn countryside, watching the trees blur past in shades of red and gold, feeling the familiar numbness settle over me like a heavy blanket. When I walked through the front door, I heard something that stopped me in my tracks. Laughter. Lily's laughter, bright and genuine and completely unexpected. I followed the sound to the kitchen, moving quietly, almost afraid that if I made too much noise, the sound would stop and I would discover I had imagined it. I found them at the kitchen island, Clara and my daughter, their hands covered in flour. Clara was teaching Lily how to make empanadas, showing her how to fold the dough over the filling and crimp the edges with a fork. There was flour on the counter, flour on the floor, flour in Lily's hair, and my daughter was laughing, actually laughing, the kind of full-body laugh that I hadn't heard from her in 2 years. The sound hit me like a physical force, and I had to grab the doorframe to steady myself. Clara looked up and saw me standing there. For a moment, something flickered across her face. Something that looked almost like fear before she smoothed it into her usual calm expression. The transformation was so quick that I almost missed it, but I filed it away in the back of my mind, one more piece of a puzzle I didn't yet know I was assembling. "Mr. Blackwell," she said, wiping her hands on her apron. Her voice was steady, professional, but I noticed her shoulders had tensed slightly. "I hope you don't mind. Lily asked if I could teach her to cook something. I should have asked permission first. I apologize if I overstepped." "Daddy, look!" Lily interrupted, holding up a misshapen empanada with the kind of pride only a child can muster. The dough was uneven, the crimping crooked, and filling was leaking out of one corner. It was perfect. "Clara says her grandmother taught her how to make these when she was my age in Brazil. Isn't that cool? Her grandmother had a little house with chickens and a garden and everything." I looked at my daughter's flour-dusted face, at the genuine happiness shining in her eyes for the first time in longer than I could remember. Then I looked at Clara, who was watching us with an expression I couldn't quite read. There was hope in that expression, I realized, but also fear. Fear of overstepping, fear of losing this job, fear of something I couldn't quite identify. "That's very cool, sweetheart," I said, and my voice came out rougher than I intended. I cleared my throat and tried again. "Clara, thank you for this." I gestured vaguely at the messy kitchen, at my laughing daughter, at the normalcy that had somehow crept into our lives without my noticing. "For all of this." Clara nodded once, a small gesture, and something in her expression softened. "She's a wonderful child, Mr. Blackwell. Curious and kind and eager to learn. It's my pleasure." She turned her attention back to Lily, showing her how to crimp the edges of the dough properly. And I watched them for a moment longer. My daughter leaned against Clara's side as naturally as if she had known her for years, and Clara adjusted her stance to accommodate the small body, wrapping one arm loosely around Lily's shoulders while demonstrating the technique with the other hand. It was such a maternal gesture, so instinctive and unrehearsed that it made my chest ache. I retreated to my study, closing the door behind me and standing in the darkness for a long moment. Through the walls, I could still hear Lily's voice chattering away, punctuated by Clara's softer responses and occasional laughter. The sound was both wonderful and terrible. Wonderful because my daughter was finally coming back to life. Terrible because it reminded me of everything we had lost, everything Rebecca would never get to see. I walked to my desk and sat down heavily, my eyes drawn to the framed photograph that sat in the corner. Rebecca smiled back at me, frozen forever in a moment of happiness at our wedding reception. She had been laughing at something my best man had said, her head thrown back, her blonde hair catching the light, completely unaware that the photographer was capturing the moment. It was my favorite picture of her because it was so genuinely her, no posed smile or practiced expression, just pure joy. "I don't know what I'm doing, Becca," I whispered to the photograph. "I'm trying, but I don't know if I'm doing any of it right." The photograph didn't answer. It never did. But for a moment, I could almost imagine that she was smiling at me, telling me that it was okay, that I was doing fine, that Lily was going to be fine. For a moment, I could almost believe it. That night, Lily talked about Clara non-stop at dinner. We sat at the kitchen table, eating the empanadas that she and Clara had made, and my daughter barely paused for breath between bites. "Daddy? Did you know that Clara can speak Spanish and English and a little bit of Portuguese? She learned Portuguese from her grandmother and Spanish from her mom, and English when she came to America. She said it was hard at first because the words got all mixed up in her head, but now she dreams in all 3 languages. Isn't that amazing? I wish I could dream in 3 languages. I made appropriate sounds of interest, but my attention was caught on something else. Clara had come to America, which meant she wasn't from here originally, which meant there was a story there, a history I knew nothing about. "Did you know that Clara lived in Brazil when she was little? Like, really little, before she could even remember most of it. She said the beach there has the whitest sand and the bluest water, and someday she wants to go back and visit. Can we go to Brazil someday, Daddy?" Clara said she would teach me some Portuguese words if I wanted to learn. I already learned how to say obrigada, that means thank you, and bonito, that means pretty. "That's wonderful, sweetheart," I said, and I meant it. Lily hadn't shown this much enthusiasm for anything in 2 years. Whatever Clara was doing, whatever magic she possessed, I was grateful for it. "And Daddy, did you know that Clara knows the names of all the birds in our garden? She showed me how to identify a cardinal, and a blue jay, and a chickadee. She said her grandmother taught her to listen to the birds because they always know when the weather is going to change. Tomorrow, she's going to show me how to make a bird feeder out of a pine cone and peanut butter." I didn't know any of those things. I realized, with a start, that I knew almost nothing about the woman who spent 9 hours a day in my home, who had somehow managed to bring my daughter back to life when everything else had failed. I knew her name, Clara Santos, and I knew she had excellent references from the agency. I knew she was punctual and efficient and thorough. But I didn't know where she had come from, or where she went when she left at 4 o'clock. I didn't know if she had family, friends, a life outside these walls. I didn't know anything that mattered. The following week, I began to notice other things, small things that I had been too preoccupied with my own grief to see before. The way Clara sometimes looked out the window with an expression of profound sadness, her dark eyes distant and unfocused, as if she was seeing something far away that caused her pain. The way she packed her lunch in the same small container every day, a container that never seemed to hold very much food, barely enough for a child, let alone a grown woman. The way she always left at exactly 4 o'clock, never a minute later, gathering her things with an urgency that seemed at odds with her usually calm demeanor. And then there were the phone calls. Twice that week, I had walked into a room to find her ending a conversation in rapid Spanish, her voice tight with worry, her brow furrowed in a way I had never seen before. Both times, she had quickly put away her phone and resumed her work as if nothing had happened. But I had seen the way her hands trembled slightly as she picked up the cleaning supplies, the way she took a deep breath to compose herself before turning to face me. I told myself it was none of my business. Everyone has their private struggles, their hidden battles, their secrets. Clara did her job well, better than well. And whatever was happening in her personal life was her own concern. But something about her had begun to occupy more of my thoughts than I cared to admit. I found myself looking for excuses to come home early, just to catch glimpses of her and Lily together. I found myself listening for the sound of her humming as she worked, those soft melodies that I had started to recognize, songs she must have learned as a child in Brazil. I found myself noticing the graceful way she moved, the gentleness in her voice when she spoke to my daughter, the rare moments when she smiled and her whole face transformed from merely pretty to genuinely beautiful. It was an uncomfortable realization, and I pushed it away every time it surfaced. I wasn't ready for those kinds of thoughts. I might never be ready. Rebecca had been gone for 2 years, but sometimes it felt like yesterday, and sometimes it felt like a lifetime, and I couldn't figure out which feeling was worse. One evening in early November, I was driving home from the office when I saw her. It was nearly 5 o'clock, an hour after she usually left, and the sun was already setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. I was taking the back roads, avoiding the highway traffic, when I spotted a familiar figure walking along the side of the road. Clara was walking quickly, her thin jacket pulled tight against the November cold, her arms wrapped around herself for warmth. She was about 2 miles from my house, heading in the opposite direction, and I realized with a start that I had no idea where she lived. I had assumed she had a car, had assumed she lived somewhere nearby, had assumed a lot of things that I was suddenly questioning. I slowed my car, intending to offer her a ride. It was getting dark and cold, and no one should be walking alone on these roads at this hour. But something made me hesitate. Maybe it was the way she kept glancing over her shoulder, as if checking to make sure she wasn't being followed. Maybe it was the urgency in her stride, the determination in the set of her shoulders. Instead of pulling up beside her, I pulled over at a distance and watched as she turned down a narrow dirt road that led into the woods. I sat there for a long moment, my hands gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. Every instinct told me to mind my own business, to drive home and forget what I had seen. She was entitled to her privacy. She was entitled to her secrets. Whatever was at the end of that dirt road was none of my concern. But I couldn't let it go. Something was wrong. I could feel it in my bones, the same way I had felt it the morning Rebecca collapsed. That split second before she hit the floor, when some primitive part of my brain knew that our lives were about to change forever. I put the car in gear and slowly followed the dirt road. The trees pressed close on either side, their bare branches reaching toward the darkening sky like skeletal fingers. The road was rutted and overgrown, clearly not maintained, and my luxury sedan protested every bump and pothole. After about a quarter mile, the road ended at a small clearing, and what I saw there made my heart stop. It was an old house, abandoned for years by the look of it. The windows were broken, jagged shards of glass still clinging to the frames. The roof was caving in, missing shingles leaving gaps that exposed the rotting beams beneath. The porch sagged dangerously to one side. The wooden boards warped and splintered. Paint peeled from every surface in long, curling strips, and the whole structure listed slightly to the left, as if a strong wind might knock it over completely. And standing on that porch, watching Clara approach, were 2 children. A boy who looked about 10 and a girl who couldn't have been older than 7. Even from this distance, I could see the resemblance immediately. They had Clara's dark hair, Clara's brown eyes, Clara's delicate features. They were her children. Clara had children. They ran to her as she approached, their small bodies hurtling off that dangerous porch and across the overgrown yard. They threw their arms around her, clinging to her as if they hadn't seen her in days rather than hours, and even from where I sat, hidden in the shadows of the trees, I could see the relief on their faces. The pure, desperate relief of children who had been waiting, worrying, hoping. Clara knelt down in the mud, and hugged them both tightly, gathering them against her body as if she could protect them from the world through sheer force of will. I watched as she pulled something from her bag. Food. The lunch she had packed that morning. The lunch that had seemed too small for one person. She hadn't been eating it herself. She had been saving it for them. The realization hit me like a physical blow. Every day for 4 months, Clara had come to my house and worked for 9 hours. Every day for 4 months, she had packed a small lunch and not eaten it. Every day for 4 months, she had walked 2 miles through whatever weather Connecticut threw at her, carrying that small container of food to feed her children while they waited for her in an abandoned house with no electricity, no running water, no heat. I sat in my car, hidden by the trees, and watched as Clara led the children inside that crumbling house. Through the broken windows, I could see the flicker of candlelight. They had no electricity. In November in Connecticut, with winter approaching and temperatures already dropping below freezing at night, they had no heat, no running water, no electricity. They had nothing. I don't know how long I sat there. Long enough for the sky to turn completely dark. Long enough for the temperature to drop until I could see my breath fogging the windshield. Long enough for my mind to race through 100 questions, each one more troubling than the last. Why hadn't she said anything? Why was she living like this when she had a job, when I paid her what I thought was a decent salary? What had happened to bring her to this point? How long had this been going on? I thought about the small lunch container. I thought about the worn clothes. I thought about the urgency with which she left every day at 4 o'clock, never a minute later, because her children were waiting for her in an abandoned house, and every minute away from them must have felt like an eternity. I thought about the phone calls in Spanish, the worried expression, the fear I had glimpsed in her eyes when I came home early and found her with Lily. She hadn't been afraid of me, I realized now. She had been afraid of losing her job. She had been afraid that I would find out about her children and decide that she was too much trouble, too complicated, too risky. She had been afraid that the one thing keeping her family alive would be taken away from her. I drove home in a daze. The roads were dark and empty, and I barely registered the familiar turns and landmarks. Lily was already asleep when I arrived, watched over by Mrs. Henderson, the elderly neighbor who sometimes helped out in the evenings. I paid her, thanked her, and then sat alone in my study, staring at the wall. The photograph of Rebecca caught my eye, her frozen smile illuminated by the dim lamp on my desk. I thought about how she would have handled this situation. My wife had been the compassionate one, the one who saw the best in everyone, who never hesitated to help those in need. She had volunteered at soup kitchens and homeless shelters. She had organized charity drives and fundraisers. She had once brought home a stray dog in the rain and refused to take it to the shelter because she was convinced it had a family somewhere that was looking for it. She had spent 3 days putting up posters and making phone calls until she found the owners, and she had cried with joy when the little girl was reunited with her pet. Rebecca would have known exactly what to do. She would have wrapped Clara in warmth and kindness and made everything right. She would have insisted that Clara and her children move in immediately, would have transformed the guest house into a home, would have had Lily and the other children playing together within hours. She would have made it look easy, natural, the obvious thing to do. But Rebecca was gone, and I was left to figure this out on my own. The next morning, Clara arrived at exactly 7 o'clock, as she always did. I had been awake for hours, sitting in the kitchen with a cup of coffee that had long since gone cold, rehearsing what I was going to say. I had tried a dozen different approaches in my mind, discarding each one as either too harsh or too pitying or too awkward. In the end, I decided to simply tell the truth and see where it led. She looked tired, more tired than usual, with dark circles under her eyes and a redness around her nose that suggested she had been crying. But her uniform was clean and pressed, her hair was neatly pulled back in its usual ponytail, and she greeted me with the same polite professionalism she always showed. The only sign that anything was wrong was the slight tremor in her hands as she set down her bag. "Good morning, Mr. Blackwell." Her voice was steady, carefully controlled. "You're up early. Can I make you some fresh coffee?" "Clara." I hesitated, searching for the right words, painfully aware of how inadequate any words would be. Could I speak with you for a moment? In my study? Something flickered in her eyes. Fear, unmistakable, undeniable fear. She was afraid of me, I realized. Or rather, she was afraid of what I might say. She was afraid that this was the end, that I had somehow discovered her secret and was about to take away the only lifeline her family had. But she nodded, her spine straightening with a dignity that broke my heart, and followed me into the study. I closed the door and gestured for her to sit. She remained standing, her spine rigid, her hands clasped tightly in front of her, her expression carefully blank. She was preparing herself, I realized. Preparing to be fired, preparing to beg if necessary, preparing to do whatever it took to keep this job a little longer. I saw you yesterday, I said quietly. There was no gentle way to say it, so I just said it. I saw where you're living. I saw the children. The color drained from her face so quickly, I thought she might faint. She swayed slightly, and I took an instinctive step toward her, ready to catch her if she fell. But she held up a hand, stopping me, and drew a deep breath that seemed to come from the very depths of her soul. Mr. Blackwell, please, I can explain, if you'll just let me explain. Clara? They're my children, she said, the words tumbling out in a rush, as if she had been holding them back for so long that now they couldn't be contained. Lucas and Sophia, their father, he left us 3 years ago. He went back to Brazil and never looked back. He said he would send money, that he would help us, but he never did, not once. I tried to make it work, I really did. I had a good job at a hotel downtown, housekeeping, and we had an apartment. It wasn't much, but it was ours. We had beds and hot water and electricity. We were doing okay. She paused, and I watched her struggle to compose herself, to keep the tears at bay. When she continued, her voice was barely above a whisper. But then I got sick. Pneumonia, the doctors said. I had to miss too much work and they let me go. The hotel. They said they were sorry, but they needed someone reliable. And then we couldn't pay rent, and we got evicted. The landlord gave us 3 days to get out. 3 days. I tried to find another place, but everything wanted a deposit, first and last month's rent, and I had nothing. We stayed with a friend for a while, then in our car, then in a shelter. But the shelter was only for women and children, and Lucas is getting older, and they said he was almost too old to stay, and I couldn't bear the thought of being separated from my son. The tears were falling now, sliding down her cheeks in silent streams, but she didn't seem to notice. She was lost in the memory, reliving the nightmare of the past few months. We've been living in that house for 2 months, she continued. It was supposed to be temporary, just until I saved enough from this job to get us a real place. I found it one day when I was walking, looking for somewhere, anywhere, that could shelter us. It was abandoned, falling apart, but it had walls and a roof mostly. It was better than sleeping in the car in the winter. I thought maybe a few weeks, a month at most, and then I could save enough for a deposit on a cheap apartment. But everything costs so much, and I have to buy food and candles and blankets, and I can't. She stopped, pressing her hand to her mouth to stifle a sob. When she spoke again, her voice had steadied, but I could hear the desperation beneath the calm, the fear that she was fighting so hard to control. I know what you're thinking. You're thinking that I lied to you, that I deceived you, that I'm not fit to work in your home, around your daughter, and you're right. I should have told you. I should have been honest from the beginning, but I couldn't risk losing this job. It's all I have. It's all they have. Without this job, we have nothing. We are nothing. She finally met my eyes, and what I saw there broke something inside me. This woman, who had shown my daughter more kindness in 4 months than anyone else in 2 years. This woman, who had been saving her own lunch to feed her children while she went hungry. This woman, who walked 2 miles in the cold every day rather than spend the bus fare that could buy a little more food. She stood before me now, waiting for me to fire her, waiting for me to take away the last thread of hope she was clinging to. And she was facing it with a dignity that I wasn't sure I could have mustered in her place. How old are they? I asked softly. Your children? She blinked, clearly not expecting that question. Lucas is 10. Sophia just turned 7 last month. We had a cupcake with a candle, just the 3 of us, in that house. Sophia said it was the best birthday she ever had because we were all together. 7 years old, the same age as Lily. The thought hit me like a physical blow, and I had to sit down on the edge of my desk to steady myself. A child the same age as my daughter was living in an abandoned house without heat or running water, celebrating her birthday with a single cupcake by candlelight, and thinking it was the best day of her life because she had her mother and her brother with her. And they stay in that house alone all day while you're here? Lucas watches Sophia. He's very responsible for his age. She said it defensively, as if she expected me to judge her, to call Child Protective Services, to use her children against her. He's had to grow up fast, too fast. I've taught them what to do if there's an emergency. They know to stay hidden, to stay quiet, to not answer the door or go outside where anyone might see them. The house isn't safe. I know it isn't safe, but it's sheltered. It's all I could find. It's all I could give them. I walked to the window and looked out at the manicured grounds of my estate. At the heated pool that I never used, its cover collecting fallen leaves. At the 3-car garage filled with vehicles I didn't need, a Tesla and a Range Rover and a vintage Porsche that I kept meaning to sell. At the guest house that had sat empty since Rebecca's parents had stopped visiting, unable to bear the memories that filled every corner of the main house. The guest house, 2 bedrooms, a full kitchen, a living room with a fireplace, heating, electricity, hot water, empty for 2 years, gathering dust, serving no purpose except as a reminder of everyone I had lost. The guest house, I said, not turning around. My voice sounded strange to my own ears, rough with emotions I couldn't quite name. It has 2 bedrooms, a full kitchen, heating, electricity. It's been empty for 2 years. Silence. I turned around to find Clara staring at me, her expression a mixture of confusion and disbelief and something that looked dangerously close to hope. "I don't understand," she said. "Move in, you and your children. Today. Now if you want. I'll have Mrs. Henderson bring over some supplies, groceries and clean sheets and towels. You can be settled by tonight." Clara shook her head, but the movement was weak, uncertain, more reflex than refusal. "Mr. Blackwell, I can't accept that. It's too much. People will talk. They'll think. I don't care what people think. I meant it in that moment." Looking at this woman who had given my daughter back her laughter, I truly didn't care what anyone thought. What I care about is that there are 2 children sleeping in an abandoned house in November. What I care about is that you've been starving yourself to feed them, that you've been walking miles in the cold, that you've been carrying this burden alone for months while working in my house and taking care of my child. What I care about is doing something that matters, something that makes a difference, something that Rebecca would have done without hesitation if she were here. At the mention of my wife's name, something in Clara's expression shifted. She looked at me, really looked at me, perhaps for the first time since I had hired her. And I saw recognition in her eyes, the understanding that passes between 2 people who have both known suffering. "You still love her very much," she said softly. "Your wife." "I do." The admission felt like both a weight and a release. "I always will. She was the best part of me, and when she died, I lost myself for a while. I'm still lost, most of the time. But she's been gone for 2 years, and I've spent those years going through the motions, pretending to be alive when I was really just existing. You and your children, what you've done for Lily, the way you've brought life back into this house, it's reminded me that there's still goodness in the world. Still things worth caring about. Still reasons to keep going." I took a step toward her, close enough to see the tears spilling over onto her cheeks. "Let me help you, Clara. Not because I want anything in return, not because I expect anything from you, but because it's the right thing to do. Because you deserve help, and I have the ability to provide it. Because 2 children shouldn't be sleeping in the cold when I have a perfectly good house sitting empty. Please, let me do this." Clara was quiet for a long moment. I watched the battle play out on her face, the war between pride and necessity, between fear and hope, between the desire to accept help and the terror of what accepting that help might mean. Finally, slowly, she nodded. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay." I drove Clara to the abandoned house myself. She sat in the passenger seat of my Range Rover, her hands folded tightly in her lap, her eyes fixed on the road ahead. She gave directions in a quiet voice. Turn left here, straight for a quarter-mile, the dirt road on the right. I could feel the tension radiating from her. The fear that somehow this was all a dream, and she would wake up to find herself still trapped in that crumbling house with her children. In daylight, the house looked even worse than it had the night before. The morning sun revealed every crack and stain, every patch of rot and decay. Half the roof had caved in completely, and I could see patches of sky through the gaps. The porch had collapsed on one side since the last time I saw it. The boards splintered and scattered across the muddy yard. How had they survived in there for 2 months? How had I not noticed how thin Clara had become, how exhausted she always looked, how she never took a break or sat down or ate anything during her 9-hour shifts? The children were inside, huddled together on a mattress that was more stain than fabric. They had pulled a thin blanket over themselves, but I could see them shivering even from the doorway. The girl, Sophia, was clutching a stuffed rabbit that looked like it had been through a war, its fur matted and one ear nearly torn off. The boy, Lucas, had his arm wrapped protectively around his sister, his body positioned between her and the door. When Clara walked in with me behind her, Lucas immediately positioned himself in front of Sophia, his small body tense with protective fury. He was a child, barely 10 years old, but his eyes had the hard, wary look of someone much older. Someone who had learned that the world was not safe, that people couldn't always be trusted, that sometimes the people you loved left and never came back. "It's okay, mijo," Clara said quickly, kneeling down to his level. "This is Mr. Blackwell. He's my boss. He's here to help us." Lucas didn't relax. His dark eyes, so much like his mother's, scanned my face with a wariness no 10-year-old should possess. I recognized that look. It was the look of a child who had been forced to become an adult too soon, who had taken on responsibilities that no child should bear. "Help us how?" he demanded. His voice was steady, but I could hear the fear beneath the bravado. "Are you calling the police? Are you going to take us away from Mom?" "No!" I crouched down so I was at his level, meeting his eyes directly. "No one is taking anyone away, I promise you that. I have a house, a small one, on my property. It's warm and safe, and it's been empty for a long time. I want you and your mom and your sister to live there. That's all. I just want to help." Lucas stared at me for a long moment, assessing, calculating. I could see him weighing my words against everything he had learned in his short, difficult life. Could this man be trusted? Was this offer real? What was the catch? Sophia peeked out from behind her brother, curiosity temporarily overcoming fear. Unlike Lucas, her face showed the openness of a younger child, someone who still wanted to believe in goodness despite everything. "A real house?" she asked, her voice small and hopeful. "With a bed? And a bathroom?" "Yes, sweetheart. A real house with real beds and a real bathroom. And a kitchen where your mom can cook for you, with a stove and an oven and a refrigerator. And heating, so you won't be cold anymore." Sophia looked at her mother, her big brown eyes filling with tears. "Mommy, can we?" Clara pulled both children into her arms, holding them so tightly it looked almost painful. I watched as she whispered something in Spanish, words I didn't understand, but whose meaning was clear. She was telling them it was going to be okay. She was telling them that finally, things were going to be okay. We loaded what little they had into my car. It didn't take long. 2 small bags of clothing, mostly worn and faded, some of it clearly too small for the children who wore it. A few books, their covers held together with tape. Sophia's stuffed rabbit, which she refused to let go of even for a moment. Lucas carried a worn backpack that he refused to let anyone touch, holding it against his chest like it contained treasure. "What's in the backpack?" I asked him as we walked to the car. He hesitated, then slowly unzipped it to show me. Inside were photographs. A stack of photographs, carefully protected in a plastic bag. Pictures of Clara and the children, of birthday parties and beach trips and ordinary moments. Pictures of a man who must have been their father, smiling in happier times. "Mom says we should remember the good times," Lucas said quietly, "even when things are hard. She says the good times are what get us through." I looked at Clara, who was helping Sophia into the back seat, and felt something shift in my chest. This woman had lost everything: her home, her security, her faith in the man who should have protected her family. She had been reduced to living in an abandoned house, starving herself to feed her children. And yet she had taught her son to remember the good times, to hold on to hope, to believe that things would get better. "Your mom is a wise woman," I said. Lucas looked at me, and for the first time, some of the wariness left his eyes. "She is. She's the strongest person I know." When we arrived at my estate, Lily was in the garden with Mrs. Henderson. She looked up as the car pulled in, and her face transformed when she saw Clara in the passenger seat. She came running over, her blonde hair flying behind her, a smile already spreading across her face. "Clara, you're here early. Are we going to make more empanadas? I've been practicing the crimping like you showed me." She stopped abruptly when she saw Lucas and Sophia climbing out of the back seat. Her eyes went wide as she looked at the two unfamiliar children, then at me, then back at them. "Who are they?" she asked, her voice uncertain but curious. Clara stepped forward, placing a gentle hand on Lily's shoulder. "Lily, these are my children, Lucas and Sophia. They're going to be staying in the little house near the garden." "You have kids?" Lily's voice rose with surprise. "Real kids? You never told me you had kids." "I know, sweetheart. I should have told you. I'm sorry." Lily processed this for a moment, her 6-year-old mind working through the new information. I watched her study the two children, her eyes lingering on Sophia, who was clutching her stuffed rabbit with white-knuckled fingers. Something seemed to click in Lily's expression, some understanding that went beyond her years. "She's scared," Lily said softly, looking at Sophia. "I was scared too, after Mommy died. Everything felt scary for a long time." She walked over to Sophia and smiled, the warm, generous smile that reminded me so much of Rebecca. It made my heart ache. "Do you want to see my room? I have a lot of toys. We could play together. I have a stuffed bunny too, but mine is pink. Maybe they could be friends?" Sophia looked at her mother, who nodded encouragingly. Then she looked at Lily, at this blonde girl who was offering friendship without hesitation, without judgment, without conditions. Slowly, tentatively, Sophia smiled back. "Okay," she whispered. And just like that, the two girls ran off together toward the main house, their laughter floating back on the autumn breeze. Lucas watched them go with a conflicted expression, clearly torn between his protective instincts and his desire to let his sister be a normal kid for once. "She'll be fine," I said to him. "Lily is a good kid. She's been through a lot too. She understands more than you might think." Lucas looked at me, really looked at me, and I saw some of the wariness finally begin to drain from his face. "Your wife died," he said. It wasn't a question. "Yes. 2 years ago. My dad left, 3 years ago. He went back to Brazil and never came back." There was pain in those words, carefully hidden beneath a matter-of-fact tone, but pain nonetheless. The pain of a 7-year-old boy who had watched his father walk out the door with a suitcase, promising to return, and slowly realizing that the promise was a lie. "I'm sorry," I said. It seemed inadequate, but it was all I had. Lucas shrugged, a gesture that tried too hard to be casual. "Mom says people leave for different reasons. Some because they have to, some because they're too weak to stay. She says the ones who stay, even when it's hard, those are the ones worth keeping." I glanced at Clara, who was standing a few feet away, pretending not to listen. Her cheeks had flushed pink, and she was studiously examining the garden, but I could see the small smile playing at the corners of her lips. "Your mom sounds like a very wise woman," I said. "She is." Lucas said it with fierce, unshakable pride. "She's the strongest person I know. She's stronger than my dad ever was." I didn't know what to say to that, so I said nothing. But as we walked toward the guest house, I found myself wondering what it would take to earn the trust of this boy who had been forced to become a man too soon, and I found myself wanting to try. Over the next few weeks, I watched as the Santos family settled into the guest house. The transformation was remarkable. Clara threw herself into making the small house a home, arranging furniture, hanging curtains, filling the kitchen with the smells of Brazilian cooking that drifted across the garden and made my mouth water. The children slowly began to relax, the tension in their shoulders easing, the wariness in their eyes fading bit by bit. Clara insisted on continuing to work, despite my offers to give her time off. "I need to work," she said when I suggested she take a few days to settle in. "I need to earn my keep, Mr. Blackwell. I won't be a charity case." I understood then that the work was as much for her as it was for me. She needed to feel useful, needed to contribute, needed to prove to herself and to me that she could take care of her family on her own. Accepting the guest house had been hard enough for her pride. Accepting anything more would have been unbearable. But the dynamics in my house had shifted in ways I hadn't anticipated. Lily and Sophia became inseparable within days, spending every moment together that they could. They played in the garden, built blanket forts in Lily's room, staged elaborate tea parties with every stuffed animal they could find. Sophia's nightmares, which Clara told me had been constant since they lost their home, began to fade. She started sleeping through the night, and the dark circles under her eyes gradually disappeared. Lucas, after his initial wariness, began to open up as well. I discovered that he was brilliant, with a natural aptitude for math and science that reminded me of myself at his age. He asked endless questions about everything, from how the stock market worked to why leaves changed color in autumn, from the mechanics of my cars to the physics of flight. I found myself spending hours with him in the evenings, explaining concepts that most 10-year-olds wouldn't understand, watching his eyes light up as he grasped each new idea. "You should be in a gifted program," I told him one evening as we sat in my study, working through a set of algebra problems I had improvised. He had mastered the basics within minutes and was already asking about more complex equations. Lucas shrugged, that casual gesture I was beginning to recognize as his way of hiding emotion. My old school didn't have one, and then we moved around so much, I missed a lot of school. Mom tried to teach me when she could, but she was always so tired from working. "What do you want to be when you grow up?" He thought about it seriously, his brow furrowed in concentration. "An engineer, maybe, or an architect. I like building things, figuring out how things work. Or maybe a doctor, so I could help people like the doctors who helped Mom when she was sick. Those are all excellent choices." "What did you want to be when you were my age?" I smiled, remembering. I wanted to be an astronaut. I was obsessed with space, with the idea of exploring the unknown. I had posters of the planets on my walls and a telescope by my window. What happened? I discovered that I got sick on roller coasters and that astronauts have to endure much worse, so I became a businessman instead. Less exciting, but easier on the stomach. Lucas laughed, and the sound made something warm bloom in my chest. This boy, who had been through so much, who had learned to build walls around his heart, was slowly letting me in. It felt like a privilege I hadn't earned. And then there was Clara. Clara, who continued to transform my house into a home, but who now lingered, sometimes, after the children were in bed, talking with me in the kitchen or the living room. Clara, who told me stories about her childhood in Brazil, about the grandmother who had raised her after her parents died, about the beaches with white sand and blue water that she dreamed of visiting again someday. Clara, who listened when I talked about Rebecca, who didn't flinch from my grief or try to fix it, who simply sat with me in the pain and made it somehow bearable. The fear had left her eyes, I noticed, replaced by a cautious optimism that made her even more beautiful than before. Yes, I had begun to notice that she was beautiful. I had been noticing it for weeks, maybe months. But I had pushed the thought away, buried it under guilt and grief and propriety. She was my employee. She was vulnerable. She had children who depended on her. Any attraction I felt was inappropriate, a betrayal of both Rebecca's memory and Clara's trust. But the thoughts came anyway, unbidden and unwelcome. The way the afternoon light caught the red-gold highlights in her dark hair, the way her smile transformed her whole face when she was genuinely happy, the way she moved with unconscious grace, her body comfortable in its own skin despite everything she had been through, the soft curve of her neck, the delicate bones of her wrists, the warmth in her brown eyes when she looked at the children. It was Lily who first said what I was afraid to think. We were in my study one evening, Lily curled up on my lap as I pretended to read, while really just enjoying the weight of her small body against my chest. She had started seeking me out more often since Clara and her children arrived, wanting to be close, wanting attention, as if their presence had reminded her that she needed more from me than I had been giving. "Daddy," she said, her voice sleepy but thoughtful, "do you like Clara?" "Of course I like Clara, sweetheart. She takes good care of us." "No, I mean like. She tilted her head back to look at me, her blue eyes serious. "The way you liked Mommy." I felt my heart stutter in my chest, missing a beat before resuming its rhythm. "Lily, it's complicated, honey. Sophia says her mom thinks you're handsome. She heard her say it on the phone to her friend Rosa. Sophia says her mom smiled really big when she was talking about you." I didn't know how to respond to that. I sat there, my daughter in my lap, and felt the world shift beneath me once again. "Mommy's not coming back, is she?" Lily asked softly. The question came out of nowhere, but somehow felt inevitable, as if she had been building toward it for a long time. "No, sweetheart, she's not. But she loved us. And she would want us to be happy, right? That's what you always say. That Mommy would want us to be happy." "Yes." The word came out rough. She would want us to be happy. Lily was quiet for a moment, her small fingers tracing patterns on my shirt. When she spoke again, her voice was certain, the way only a child's voice can be. "I think Clara makes us happy. I think Sophia and Lucas make us happy. I think Mommy would like them. I think she would be glad they came to live here." I pressed a kiss to the top of my daughter's head and held her close, unable to speak past the lump in my throat. Leave it to a 6-year-old to cut straight to the heart of things, to say what adults were too afraid or too complicated to say. That night, after Lily was asleep, I sat alone in the darkness of my bedroom and thought about Rebecca. I thought about the life we had built together, the dreams we had shared, the future we had planned. I thought about the morning she died, how ordinary it had been, how I had kissed her goodbye without knowing it was the last time. And then I thought about Clara, about the way she hummed while she worked, old Brazilian songs that filled the house with music, about the way she listened to Lily's chatter with genuine interest, never dismissing her or talking down to her, about the way she had sacrificed everything for her children, had starved herself and lived in squalor rather than ask for help, about the strength it took to keep going when everything seemed hopeless. I thought about the way my heart beat faster when she walked into a room, the way I found excuses to be near her, to hear her laugh, to watch her with the children, the way I had begun to look forward to each day in a way I hadn't in 2 years. Was it possible to love again without betraying the love I still felt for my wife? I didn't have an answer, but as I lay in the dark staring at the ceiling, I realized that for the first time since Rebecca's death, I wanted to find one. November turned to December, and the estate transformed for the holidays. Clara threw herself into decorating with an enthusiasm that surprised me, stringing lights along the eaves of the guest house, helping Lily and Sophia make paper snowflakes for the windows, teaching all 3 children how to make Brazilian Christmas cookies called beijinhos and brigadeiros. The kitchen was filled with the smell of coconut and chocolate, and laughter echoed through halls that had been silent for too long. I found myself spending more and more time at home. My business partner, David, commented on it during one of our weekly calls, his voice casual but his meaning clear. "You've been working from home a lot lately," he observed. "Missed the last 2 partner dinners. Everything okay?" "Everything's fine. Better than fine, actually." "Is there someone?" David had known me for 15 years. He had been my best man at my wedding and had held me together in the weeks after Rebecca's death. He knew me well enough to hear what I wasn't saying. "There might be," I admitted. "It's complicated." "It's always complicated. That doesn't mean it's not worth pursuing." "Nathan, Rebecca would want you to be happy. You know that. She told me once at your wedding reception that her greatest fear was that if anything ever happened to her, you would shut yourself off from the world. She made me promise to not let that happen." "She said that?" "She did. She loved you enough to want you to find love again if she couldn't be there. Don't dishonor that by punishing yourself forever." I thought about his words long after we hung up. Rebecca had always been thinking of others, even at her own wedding, even when contemplating her own mortality. She had known me better than I knew myself. Guilt is a choice, David had said. So is happiness. Choose wisely, my friend. Christmas Eve arrived with a light snow that dusted the grounds in white, turning the estate into a winter wonderland. I had invited Clara and her children to join us for dinner, an invitation she had accepted with obvious reluctance. She still struggled to accept anything that felt like charity, still insisted on maintaining the boundaries between employer and employee that had grown increasingly blurred over the past weeks. But when she walked into the dining room that evening, those boundaries crumbled a little more. She was wearing a simple green dress that she must have found at a thrift store, nothing expensive or elaborate, but it fit her perfectly and brought out the warmth in her eyes. Her dark hair was loose around her shoulders, soft and shining in the candlelight. And she wore the smallest hint of makeup, just enough to accentuate her natural beauty. I forgot how to breathe. "You look beautiful," I said, the words escaping before I could stop them. They hung in the air between us, charged with meaning neither of us was ready to acknowledge. Clara ducked her head, but not before I caught the pleased smile that curved her lips and the faint blush that colored her cheeks. "Thank you, Mr. Blackwell." "Nathan," I corrected her. "Please, it's Christmas Eve. Call me Nathan." She hesitated, testing the name silently on her lips. Then she nodded, and when she spoke, her voice was soft and warm. "Nathan." Hearing my name on her lips did something to me that I wasn't prepared for. I turned away, busying myself with lighting the candles on the table, trying to compose myself. What was I doing? What were we doing? She was my employee. She lived in my guest house with her children. Any relationship beyond professional would be inappropriate, could be seen as coercive, could destroy everything we had built. But then I looked at her again, saw the hope in her eyes, the same hope I felt in my own heart, and I thought, maybe some things are worth the risk. Dinner was chaos in the best possible way. The children talked over each other, sharing stories and jokes and elaborate plans for what they hoped to find under the tree. Lucas had shed the last of his wariness and was actually laughing, teasing Lily about her crush on some boy band singer whose poster hung in her room. Sophia was teaching everyone Portuguese words, delighted when we inevitably mispronounced them and giggling at our attempts. Even Lucas cracked a smile when I tried to say Feliz Natal, and mangled it so badly that Clara nearly choked on her wine. And through it all, I kept catching Clara's eye across the table. Each time, she would look away quickly, but not quickly enough to hide the warmth in her gaze. Something was building between us, something neither of us had asked for or expected, but something that felt increasingly inevitable. After dinner, we gathered in the living room by the tree. I had gone a little overboard with the decorations this year, something I hadn't done since Rebecca died. The tree was laden with lights and ornaments, many of them handmade by the children over the past weeks. Presents were piled beneath it, wrapped in bright paper, and the fire crackled cheerfully in the hearth. The children were playing a card game that Lily had received early, their heads bent together in concentration. Clara and I sat on the couch, a careful distance apart, watching them. "Thank you," Clara said softly, "for all of this, for everything you've done for us." "You don't have to thank me." "Yes, I do." She turned to look at me, and the firelight danced in her dark eyes. "You saved us, Nathan. When you found us in that house, we had nothing. Less than nothing. We had lost everything, and I was running out of hope. I didn't know how much longer I could keep going, keep pretending for the children that everything would be okay when I wasn't sure it would be. Anyone would have... No." She shook her head firmly. "Not anyone. Most people would have looked the other way. Most people would have fired me the moment they found out I had been hiding something so big, would have washed their hands of the whole situation and moved on with their lives. You didn't do that. You brought us into your home. You gave my children safety and warmth and friendship. You gave me back my dignity, my hope, my belief that there are still good people in the world." I didn't know what to say. I sat there, painfully aware of how close she was, of the faint scent of her perfume, of the way her hand rested on the cushion between us, inches from my own. "Daddy!" Lily's voice broke the moment. "Sophia says in Brazil they open presents at midnight. Can we do that? Please, please, please." I checked my watch. It was only 8 o'clock. "How about we open one present each now and save the rest for morning?" A chorus of agreement met this compromise. The children scrambled to the tree, sorting through the piles of wrapped packages with the single-minded focus of kids on Christmas Eve. I had gone perhaps more than a little overboard with the gifts, buying not just for Lily, but for Lucas and Sophia as well. When Clara had protested, I had simply said that Christmas was for children, all children, and she had finally relented, with a look that was equal parts gratitude and exasperation. Lily chose a package, wrapped in silver paper, and carefully opened it to reveal a beautiful journal with a lock, its cover decorated with flowers and butterflies. "For all your secrets," I told her, and she beamed at me with such joy that my heart ached. Lucas opened a set of advanced science experiment kits, the kind designed for kids much older than 10, and his eyes went wide with excitement. He looked at me, then at the kit, then back at me, and for a moment he seemed unable to speak. "Thank you," he finally managed. This is exactly what I wanted. How did you know?" "I pay attention," I said simply, and was rewarded with a smile that transformed his serious face into something young and hopeful. Sophia chose a princess dress-up set that had her twirling around the room within minutes, her worn stuffed rabbit temporarily forgotten in favor of a sparkling tiara. Lily joined her, and soon both girls were dancing in front of the fire, their laughter filling the room. "There's one more," I said, reaching behind the tree for a small box I had hidden there. My heart was pounding as I handed it to Clara. "For you." She looked at the box, then at me, confusion and something else, something vulnerable, flickering in her eyes. "Nathan, you didn't have to do this. You've already given us so much. Open it." She unwrapped it slowly, her fingers trembling slightly. Inside the box was a delicate gold necklace with a small pendant, a mother bird with 3 baby birds sheltered beneath her wings. "It's beautiful," she whispered, "but I can't accept this. It's too much." "You can." I took the necklace from the box and moved behind her. "May I?" She nodded, lifting her hair so I could fasten the clasp. My fingers brushed the soft skin of her neck, and I felt her shiver. The air between us was charged, electric, and I had to force myself to step back instead of leaning closer. "There," I said, my voice rougher than I intended. "Perfect." Clara touched the pendant, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. The mother bird and her babies. "Nathan, I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything." But she did say something. She reached up and placed her hand on my cheek, her touch gentle, almost reverent. And in that moment, with the fire crackling and the children laughing and the snow falling softly outside, I felt something shift between us, something irreversible. Later, after the children had finally been convinced to go to bed with promises of more presents in the morning, Clara lingered in the living room. We cleaned up the discarded wrapping paper together, moving around each other with an awareness that was almost painful. "They were so happy," she said, gathering paper into a trash bag. "I haven't seen Lucas smile like that in years. He's always been so serious, so worried about me and Sophia. Tonight he got to just be a kid. He's a good kid, they both are. You've raised them well, Clara. Despite everything, despite all the obstacles, you've raised 2 incredible children." She stopped, the bag still in her hands, and looked at me. "Nathan, what is this? What are we doing?" I could have pretended not to understand. I could have deflected, made a joke, maintained the careful distance we had been keeping for weeks. But I was tired of pretending. I was tired of ignoring what was happening between us. And it was Christmas Eve, a night for honesty, for hope, for taking chances on things that seemed impossible. "I don't know," I admitted. "All I know is that when you walk into a room, my heart beats faster. When I hear you laugh, I want to hear it again. When I think about you leaving someday, taking the children and moving somewhere else, starting a new life without us, I feel like I can't breathe." Clara's eyes widened, but she didn't look away. "I'm your employee. Is that all you want to be?" The question hung between us. I could hear the fire crackling, the wind whistling outside. the rapid beating of my own heart. "No," she finally whispered. "It's not." I took a step toward her, and she didn't move away. Another step, and we were standing so close I could count the freckles on her nose, could see the gold flecks in her brown eyes, could feel the warmth of her breath on my skin. "I haven't felt this way since Rebecca," I said. "I thought I would never feel this way again. I thought that part of me had died with her, that my heart was too broken to ever love again. But then you came along and your children, and suddenly the world had color again. Suddenly there was music and laughter and hope. Nathan, I'm not asking for anything. I'm not expecting anything. I just need you to know that you've changed everything for me. You and Lucas and Sophia. You've brought life back into this house. Back into me." Clara reached up and placed her hand on my cheek. The touch was gentle, almost tentative, as if she was afraid I might disappear. "I've been so scared," she said. "Scared that I was imagining things. Scared that you could never feel anything for someone like me. Someone with so much baggage, so many problems. I'm a single mother with 2 kids, no money, no stability. I was living in an abandoned house 2 months ago. I'm hardly the kind of woman that men like you fall for. Your problems don't define you, Clara. Your courage does. Your love for your children does. The way you've faced every obstacle with grace and determination. The way you keep going even when everything seems hopeless. That's what defines you. That's what I see when I look at you." A tear slipped down her cheek, and I caught it with my thumb, cradling her face in my hand. "I want to kiss you," I said, "but only if that's what you want too." In answer, Clara rose up on her toes and pressed her lips to mine. It was a soft kiss, tentative and sweet. The first kiss of 2 people who have been hurt and are afraid of being hurt again. But beneath the gentleness was something else. A heat. A promise. A beginning. When we finally pulled apart, both of us breathless, Clara was smiling. Actually smiling, with tears still wet on her cheeks, her eyes bright with happiness. "I've wanted that for a long time," she admitted. "So have I." We stood there in the glow of the Christmas tree lights, holding each other, and for the first time in 2 years, I felt like I had finally come home. The weeks that followed were a careful dance of discovery. We didn't rush things. With 3 children watching our every move, noticing every glance and smile and accidental touch, we couldn't have rushed things even if we wanted to. But slowly, cautiously, we began building something new together. We went on dates, real dates, leaving the children with Mrs. Henderson while we explored restaurants in Greenwich and New Haven, walked through museums in New York, strolled through snow-covered parks, holding hands like teenagers. We talked for hours, sharing our stories, our fears, our dreams. I learned about Clara's childhood in Brazil, about the grandmother who had raised her after her parents died in a car accident when she was just 5. I learned about her dreams of becoming a teacher, of helping children the way her grandmother had helped her, dreams that had been derailed when she met Carlos, when she got pregnant, when life took her in directions she never expected. She learned about me too, about my parents' expectations, how they had mapped out my entire life before I was born, how I had spent years trying to live up to a standard I never asked for, about the pressure I had felt my whole life to succeed, to be the best, to never show weakness, about the way Rebecca had been my refuge from all of it, the one person who loved me, not for what I achieved, but for who I was. "She sounds wonderful," Clara said one night. We were in the living room, the children asleep, sitting close together on the couch. "I wish I could have met her. She would have loved you," I said, and I meant it. "She would have loved the way you are with the children, the way you face challenges, the strength you show. She would have been your biggest champion." "Do you think she would have approved? Of us?" I thought about it, really thought about it, searching my heart for the truth. Yes, I think she would have. Rebecca always wanted me to be happy. She made me promise once that if anything ever happened to her, I wouldn't spend the rest of my life alone. She said I had too much love to give to let it go to waste. Clara leaned her head on my shoulder, and I wrapped my arm around her, pulling her close. "I'm scared," she admitted softly. "I've been hurt before, I thought Carlos loved me and he left. What if this doesn't work? What if I'm not enough? You're more than enough, I said. You're everything, and I'm scared too. I loved Rebecca with everything I had, and losing her nearly destroyed me. The thought of opening my heart again, of risking that kind of pain, terrifies me. But you know what terrifies me more? The thought of not trying, the thought of letting fear win. She lifted her head to look at me, her brown eyes soft in the firelight. When did you become so wise? I'm not wise. I'm just a man who finally realized that life is too short to waste on fear. I kissed her then, slow and deep, and felt something settle in my chest. Rightness. Peace. The sense that after years of wandering in the dark, I had finally found my way home. We didn't hide our relationship from the children, but we didn't flaunt it either. We were careful, respectful, aware that 3 young hearts were watching us and learning what love looked like. Lily, true to form, was delighted by the development. She had decided weeks ago that Clara should be her new mom, and was simply pleased that the adults were finally catching up to her superior wisdom. Lucas was more cautious, which I understood. He had been abandoned once by a father figure. He had learned the hard way that people who promised to stay sometimes left without warning. He wasn't going to trust easily, and I didn't push him. I just kept showing up, day after day, being present, being consistent, being the kind of man I hoped he would someday become. And slowly, tentatively, he began to open up to me. He started coming to me with homework questions, preferring my explanations to the ones in his textbooks. He asked if I would teach him to play chess, and we spent hours in my study, the board between us, talking about strategy and patience and thinking 3 moves ahead. He even started calling me Nathan instead of Mr. Blackwell, a small change that felt like a major victory. Sophia, sweet Sophia, was the first to say what everyone else was thinking. It was a quiet evening in late February. We had all had dinner together in the main house, something that had become a nightly ritual, and the children were playing in the living room while Clara and I cleaned up the kitchen. Sophia wandered in, her stuffed rabbit dangling from one hand, and tugged on my sleeve. "Mr. Nathan," she said, her big brown eyes looking up at me with that innocent intensity only children possess. "Are you going to be our new daddy?" Clara and I both froze. I could feel her tense beside me, could see the fear flicker in her eyes. We hadn't discussed the future, not in concrete terms. We were still taking things day by day, still afraid to hope for too much too soon. "Sophia," Clara said gently, kneeling down to her daughter's level. "We don't know what the future holds, Mija. We can't make promises about things like that." But Sophia wasn't deterred. She looked at me with those big brown eyes, waiting for an answer. Patient, trusting. "Would you like that?" I asked her. "If I were your daddy?" Sophia nodded vigorously. "Lily says you're the best daddy in the whole world. She says you tuck her in every night and read her stories and protect her from bad dreams. I want a daddy who does that too. My other daddy didn't do that. He was always too busy or too tired. But you're not like him. You're like the daddies in the stories, the good ones." I looked at Clara, who had tears streaming down her face, then back at Sophia. This little girl who had been through so much, who had lived in an abandoned house and celebrated her birthday with a single cupcake by candlelight. This little girl who still believed in happy endings. "I can't make promises about the future," I said carefully, choosing my words with care. "But I can promise you this, Sophia. As long as I'm around, I will always protect you and Lucas. I will always be here when you need me. I will read you stories and tuck you in and chase away the bad dreams. Whether that makes me your daddy or just your Nathan, that's up to you." Sophia threw her arms around my neck and hugged me tight. "You're my Nathan," she declared, "and that's just as good as a daddy." From that moment on, something changed. The careful distance we had been maintaining, the boundaries between 2 families sharing space, simply melted away. We started having dinner together every night, all 5 of us around the same table. We started planning activities as a family, weekend trips to museums and zoos and beaches, movie nights with popcorn and blanket forts, Sunday morning pancake sessions where everyone helped and the kitchen ended up covered in flour. It wasn't perfect. We had our struggles, our arguments, our moments of doubt. Clara still battled her pride, still struggled to accept help without feeling like a burden. I still grappled with guilt, still wondered sometimes if I was betraying Rebecca's memory by finding happiness again. Lucas still had days when he withdrew into himself, haunted by the father who had abandoned him, afraid that the same thing would happen again. But we faced it all together, and that made all the difference. It was a morning in late March, when things came to a head in a way none of us expected. Clara's ex-husband, Carlos Santos, the man who had walked out on her and the children 3 years ago without a backward glance, suddenly reappeared. He showed up at the gate of the estate, demanding to see his children, claiming that he had rights as their father. The security system alerted me, and when I saw his face on the camera, my blood ran cold. He was younger than I expected, handsome in a careless way, with the same dark hair and eyes that Lucas had inherited. But there was something weak in his face, something that spoke of a man who took the easy path, who ran when things got hard. Clara was terrified when I told her. She had been in the kitchen, helping Sophia with her homework, and all the color drained from her face. "He can't take them," she said, pacing my study, her hands shaking. "He left. He gave up his rights when he walked away. He hasn't paid child support, hasn't called on birthdays, hasn't done anything a father is supposed to do. He can't just come back now and expect to be part of their lives." "He won't take them," I said firmly. "I promise you, Clara, I won't let that happen." I hired the best family lawyer in the state, a woman named Margaret Chen, who had a reputation for being ruthless in custody cases. I gathered evidence of abandonment, of Clara's years of single parenting, of the stability and love the children now had. I prepared to fight with every resource at my disposal, but in the end, it wasn't the lawyers who settled things. It was Lucas. When Carlos came to the house for the mandated supervised visit, Lucas was waiting for him in the living room. My heart broke at the sight of this 10-year-old boy, standing with his shoulders back and his chin up, facing the man who had abandoned him. "Why are you here?" Lucas asked. His voice was steady, but I could see the tremor in his hands. "You left us. You said you'd come back, and you never did. You said you'd send money, and you never did. Mom cried every night for a year after you left. Sophia had nightmares. I had to be the man of the house when I was 7 years old because you weren't there." And Carlos tried to explain, tried to make excuses. He talked about needing to find himself, about being too young to be a father, about circumstances beyond his control. The excuses rang hollow, and I saw Lucas's expression harden with each word. "Nathan is more of a father to us than you ever were," Lucas said, cutting off Carlos's explanations. His voice was steady now, his certainty absolute. "He found us living in an abandoned house, and he didn't judge us. He gave us a home. He reads to Sophia every night and helps me with my homework and makes Mom smile. He shows up. Every day he shows up. That's what a dad does. That's what you never did." Carlos tried to speak, but Lucas wasn't finished. "You don't get to come back now and pretend like none of that matters. You don't get to decide you want to be a father after 3 years of nothing. We don't need you anymore. We have a family now. A real family. And you're not part of it." The room was silent. Sophia had crept in at some point and was standing behind Clara, clutching her stuffed rabbit. Lily was beside me, her hand in mine. We were all watching Lucas, this boy who had grown up too fast, who had carried burdens no child should carry, standing up for his family with a courage that took my breath away. Carlos left that day and didn't come back. His lawyer sent papers a week later, relinquishing his parental rights. Clara cried when she read them, but they were tears of relief, not sadness. "It's over," she said, clutching the papers to her chest. "It's really over. He can't hurt us anymore." I held her close and let her cry, and when the tears finally stopped, she looked up at me with something new in her eyes, something that looked like certainty, something that looked like forever. "I love you, Nathan Blackwell," she said. "I love you more than I ever thought I could love anyone again. You gave me back my hope when I had lost it. You gave my children a home and a future. You gave me a reason to believe in happy endings. I love you too, Clara Santos. I love you and Lucas and Sophia. I love our chaotic family dinners and our Sunday morning pancakes and the way Sophia asks 100 questions about everything. And the way Lucas pretends he's too cool for hugs, but hugs me anyway. Clara laughed through her tears. So what do we do now? I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small, velvet box. I had been carrying it for weeks, waiting for the right moment. This felt like the right moment. Marry me, I said. Let me be a father to your children. Let me spend the rest of my life making you happy. Let's make this family official. Clara's eyes went wide. She looked at the box, at me, back at the box. Nathan, we haven't even been together that long. Are you sure? I've never been more sure of anything in my life. I know what it feels like to lose someone, Clara. I know how precious time is, how quickly it can run out. I don't want to waste another moment wondering what if. I want to spend the rest of my life with you. I want to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep next to you every night. I want to watch our children grow up together. I want to grow old with you. Say yes. For a long, agonizing moment, she was silent. Then, slowly, a smile spread across her face, bright as the sun, beautiful as anything I had ever seen. Yes, she whispered. Yes, 1,000 times, yes. I slipped the ring onto her finger, a simple diamond that caught the light, and kissed her. Somewhere in the house I heard 3 children cheering. The wedding was in June, in the garden of the estate, surrounded by the flowers that Clara had planted in the spring. She had spent weeks preparing the garden, planting roses and lilies and hydrangeas, creating an oasis of color and fragrance that took my breath away when I walked down the path to the altar. Lily was the flower girl, scattering rose petals with wild abandon and twirling so much that half the petals ended up in her hair instead of on the ground. Lucas and Sophia walked their mother down the aisle, one on each side, their faces shining with a joy that had been absent for so long. Clara was beautiful. She wore a simple white dress, nothing elaborate, but perfect for her. Her dark hair was crowned with small white flowers, and she carried a bouquet of the roses she had grown herself. When she reached me at the altar, I had to blink back tears. My mother came, and for once she didn't have any criticism, any suggestions for improvement, any subtle implications that I wasn't meeting expectations. She just held my hand and told me that Rebecca would be proud of me. She would have loved Clara, my mother said. She would have loved seeing you happy again. She's at peace now, Nathan. You can be at peace too. I think maybe she sent Clara to me, I said. I know that sounds crazy, but it doesn't sound crazy at all. Love works in mysterious ways. And we said our vows as the sun set over the Connecticut hills, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. Clara promised to love me through good times and bad, through chaos and calm, through all the challenges that life would bring. I promised to be her partner, her protector, her best friend. I promised to love her children as my own, to be the father they deserved, to never leave and never stop trying. By the power vested in me, the officiant said, I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss the bride. I kissed Clara as our children cheered and clapped, as our guests laughed and wiped away tears, as the last rays of sunlight painted us in gold. And I thought about the journey that had brought us here, about the grief and the loss and the lonely nights, about the abandoned house in the woods and the children huddled on a stained mattress, about the courage it had taken for Clara to keep going, and the courage it had taken for me to open my heart again. That night, as Clara and I danced our first dance as husband and wife, I looked out at the crowd of people who had gathered to celebrate with us. I saw Lily teaching Sophia how to waltz, their small feet stumbling over each other in the most adorable way. I saw Lucas deep in conversation with David, probably asking about investments or algorithms or some other topic far too advanced for his age. I saw my mother crying happy tears and Mrs. Henderson sneaking cookies to the children when she thought no one was watching, and I realized that this was what it meant to be alive. Not just existing, not just going through the motions, but truly living, loving and being loved, taking risks and facing fears, opening your heart even when it's been broken before. Clara looked up at me, her eyes shining in the soft light of the reception hall. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. "I'm thinking about how lucky I am. I'm thinking about how I almost missed all of this. If I hadn't followed you that day, if I hadn't found you in that house." "But you did," she said. "You followed me. You found me. and you chose to help instead of looking away. That's who you are, Nathan. That's the man I fell in love with. The man who followed his housekeeper into the woods like some kind of stalker? Clara laughed, the sound bright and beautiful and full of joy. The man who cared enough to notice that something was wrong. The man who didn't let pride or awkwardness stop him from doing the right thing. The man who gave me and my children a second chance at life. You gave me a second chance too, I said. I was barely alive before you came along. I was just existing, waiting for the days to pass, going through the motions of living without actually feeling anything. You reminded me what it felt like to hope again, to love again. Clara reached up and touched my face, her fingers gentle against my cheek. Then I guess we saved each other, she said. I guess we did. The music swelled around us, and I pulled my wife close, breathing in the scent of her perfume, feeling the warmth of her body against mine. In that moment, I understood something I had been struggling to accept for 2 years. Love doesn't diminish when it grows. Loving Clara didn't mean I loved Rebecca any less. It just meant my heart had room for more. And that was okay. That was more than okay. That was exactly how it was supposed to be. As I held my wife close, I made a silent vow. To Rebecca, for loving me first and teaching me what it meant to have a partner. To Clara, for loving me now and showing me that the heart has infinite capacity for more. To our children, for being the reason we kept fighting, kept hoping, kept believing. This was our happily ever after, not perfect but real, not easy but worth every struggle. The next morning, I woke to the sound of laughter drifting up from the kitchen. The smell of coffee and pancakes filled the air, and I could hear Lily's voice chattering about something, with Sophia's questions interrupting every few seconds. I got out of bed and made my way downstairs. Clara was at the stove, flipping pancakes, with the ease of someone who had done it 1,000 times. Lucas was setting the table, and when he saw me, he added an extra place setting. "For you," he said when I looked at him questioningly. "You're part of the family now, officially. You should have a spot at the table." I felt my throat tighten. "Thanks, Lucas." He shrugged, but I caught the small smile he was trying to hide. Lily spotted me first and came running over, throwing her arms around my legs. "Daddy, Clara made pancakes with chocolate chips, and she says we can go to the beach today. Can we, please?" I looked at Clara, who was watching me with that warm smile that never failed to make my heart skip. "The beach sounds perfect," I said, and it was. That day and every day after, perfect in its imperfection, perfect in its chaos and noise and laughter and love. Perfect because we were together. That's the end of our story, or at least this chapter of it. There would be more chapters to come. Lucas would grow up and go to college, studying engineering just like he always dreamed, and he would build bridges and buildings that would stand for centuries. Sophia would become a teacher, fulfilling her mother's dream, passing on her love of learning to a new generation of children. Lily would become a nurse, bringing comfort to others in their darkest moments, just as Clara had brought comfort to her. Clara and I would grow old together, watching our children, and eventually our grandchildren fill the estate with laughter and love. We would face challenges, as all families do, health scares and financial setbacks, and the inevitable losses that come with time, but we would face them together, just as we had promised on our wedding day. And through it all, we would remember how it began. A millionaire following his housekeeper into the woods, an abandoned house in the Connecticut cold. 2 children huddled on a stained mattress, waiting for their mother, hoping that somehow things would get better. We would remember, and we would be grateful. Because that's what love does. It takes the broken pieces and makes something new, something stronger, something beautiful. It finds you when you least expect it, in the most unlikely places, through the most unexpected people. And when it does, all you have to do is be brave enough to let it in. I was brave enough, and it changed everything. The first time I visited Rebecca's grave after the wedding, I brought Clara with me. It was a Sunday morning in early July, the summer heat already building, the sky a perfect cloudless blue. The children were at home with Mrs. Henderson, and Clara and I drove to the cemetery in comfortable silence, her hand resting in mine on the center console. I hadn't been to the grave since before Christmas. The guilt of that absence had been gnawing at me for months. mixing with a different kind of guilt. The guilt of moving on, of finding happiness, of living a life that Rebecca would never be part of. The cemetery was peaceful. Green grass stretching between rows of headstones, old oak trees providing patches of shade. We walked together along the familiar path, and when we reached Rebecca's grave, Clara hung back, giving me space. The headstone was simple: Rebecca Ann Blackwell, beloved wife and mother, forever in our hearts. I had chosen those words 2 years ago, standing in a funeral home office, trying to summarize a life in a few inadequate phrases. "Hi, Becca," I said softly. "It's been a while. I'm sorry I haven't visited. Things have been complicated." I knelt down and placed the flowers I had brought, white lilies that had been her favorite. Clara remained a few steps behind, close enough to offer support, but far enough to give me privacy. "I got married again," I continued. "Her name is Clara. She's wonderful, Becca. I think you would like her. She's kind and strong, and she loves Lily as if she were her own. She has 2 kids of her own, Lucas and Sophia. They're amazing kids. Sophia reminds me of Lily at that age, all questions and wonder. Lucas is serious and smart and protective. They've become a family, all of us together." I felt tears prick my eyes and blinked them back. "I know you wanted this for me. I know you told David to make sure I didn't spend my life alone. For a long time, I couldn't imagine being with anyone else. The thought felt like betrayal, like forgetting you. But Clara helped me understand that loving again doesn't mean loving you less. My heart just grew bigger to make room for more." I touched the headstone, tracing the letters of her name. "Lily is doing so well. She laughs now, really laughs, the way she used to when you were alive. She has friends and hobbies and big dreams. She talks about you sometimes, shares memories with Sophia and Lucas. She hasn't forgotten you, Becca. None of us have." I stood up, brushing grass from my knees, and turned to look at Clara. She was watching me with tears in her eyes, her expression full of compassion and understanding. "Come meet her," I said, extending my hand. Clara hesitated, then walked forward and took my hand. We stood together in front of the grave, 2 people who had each lost so much, who had somehow found each other in the wreckage. "Rebecca," I said, "this is Clara, my wife." Clara wiped her eyes with her free hand. "Thank you," she said softly to the headstone. "Thank you for loving him so well. Thank you for teaching him how to be a wonderful father. I promise I'll take care of him and Lily. I promise I'll honor your memory." We stood there for a long time, the 3 of us, connected across the boundary between life and death. And when we finally walked away, I felt something I hadn't felt in 2 years. Peace. The summer passed in a blur of beach trips and barbecues, of lazy afternoons by the pool, and firefly-lit evenings in the garden. The children grew closer each day, forming bonds that transcended biology. Lily, Lucas, and Sophia became inseparable, 3 siblings in every way that mattered. Clara enrolled Lucas and Sophia in the local elementary school for the fall, and we spent August shopping for school supplies and new clothes. Experiences that the children had never taken for granted after years of uncertainty. Sophia spent an hour in the shoe store, trying on every pair of sneakers, marveling that she could have shoes that weren't worn or too small. Lucas chose his backpack with careful deliberation, understanding the significance of having something new and his own. "This is really ours?" Sophia asked, looking at the pile of supplies in the cart. Notebooks and pencils, crayons and folders, all brand new, all for her. "We don't have to share with anyone? We don't have to give it back?" "It's really yours," Clara said, her voice steady even though I could see the emotion in her eyes. "All of it." Sophia threw her arms around her mother's waist, and Lucas put a hand on his sister's shoulder, his own eyes suspiciously bright. "Thank you," he said to me quietly. "For all of this. For everything." I put my hand on his shoulder in return. "You're family, Lucas. Family takes care of each other." He nodded, and I saw something shift in his expression. Acceptance, trust, the last walls coming down. When September arrived and school began, I found myself experiencing everything through new eyes. I attended back-to-school nights for 3 children instead of 1. I helped with homework in the evenings, 3 heads bent over textbooks at the kitchen table. I cheered at soccer games and school plays, my voice hoarse by the end of each event. Clara joined the PTA and quickly became one of the most popular members, her warmth and organizational skills making her invaluable. She started a program to provide school supplies to families who couldn't afford them, drawing on her own experience to identify those in need and offer help with dignity and discretion. "You're amazing, you know that," I told her one evening as she prepared care packages at the kitchen table. "The way you help people, the way you see what others need." She shrugged, but I could see the pleased flush on her cheeks. "I know what it's like to need help and be afraid to ask. I know what it's like to feel invisible, to struggle in silence. If I can make that easier for even one family, it's worth it. I love you." She looked up at me, her eyes soft. "I love you too. I love this life we've built. Sometimes I still can't believe it's real. Sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night and have to check that I'm actually here, in this house with you. It's real," I said. "I promise you it's real, and it's forever." October brought Halloween, and the children threw themselves into preparations with enthusiasm. Lily wanted to be a princess, Sophia wanted to be a fairy, and Lucas, after much deliberation, decided to be a scientist. Clara spent weeks making costumes, her sewing machine humming late into the night, and the results were spectacular. We went trick-or-treating as a family, walking through the neighborhood hand in hand, watching the children run from house to house with pillowcases that grew heavier with each stop. Lucas pretended to be too old for such childish activities, but I caught him grinning when a neighbor complimented his costume. "Best Halloween ever," Sophia declared as we walked home, her wings slightly askew, her face painted with glitter. "This is even better than my birthday." "You say that about everything now," Lucas pointed out, but his tone was fond rather than critical. "Because everything is better now," Sophia said simply. "We have a home, and a family, and candy. What else do you need?" Clara caught my eye over the children's heads and smiled. What else, indeed? Thanksgiving came next, and we hosted dinner at the estate, filling the dining room with family and friends. My mother came, and Clara's friend Rosa, who had flown up from Florida. Mrs. Henderson joined us, and David and his wife, and before I knew it, the table that had seemed so empty for 2 years was surrounded by people and noise and laughter. "Remember Thanksgiving 2 years ago?" Clara asked me quietly as we watched the chaos unfold. "I was alone in that apartment with the kids, trying to make the best of what we had. I made soup from canned vegetables and told them it was a special recipe." "I remember Thanksgiving 2 years ago," I said. "I was alone in this house with Lily, ordering takeout because I couldn't face cooking without Rebecca. We ate in front of the TV and pretended it was a special treat. Look at us now." I looked at the table, at Lily and Sophia giggling over something, at Lucas explaining the physics of football to David, at my mother and Rosa comparing notes on grandchildren. I looked at the house that was finally full again, at the life that had somehow grown from the ashes of grief and loss. "Look at us now," I agreed. December brought Christmas again, our second one together, and this time we were ready. Clara organized the decorating with military precision, assigning tasks to each child, and the house was transformed into a winter wonderland by the first week of the month. The guest house was empty now. Clara and the children had moved into the main house in September, their belongings merging with ours until you couldn't tell where one family ended and the other began. We had converted the guest house into a playroom for the children, a space where they could be as loud and messy as they wanted without worrying about disturbing anyone. On Christmas Eve, we gathered in the living room, all 5 of us, and exchanged gifts beside the tree. Lucas received the advanced robotics kit he had been hinting about for months, and immediately began assembling it on the living room floor. Sophia got a complete set of art supplies and spent the rest of the evening drawing pictures of our family. Lily received a microscope and could barely contain her excitement about becoming a scientist like Lucas. Clara gave me a framed photograph that stopped my breath. It was a picture of all of us, taken at the wedding, but she had done something remarkable. Using old photographs I had shown her, she had digitally added an image of Rebecca in the corner, transparent but present, watching over our new family with her beautiful smile. "I hope this isn't inappropriate," she said nervously as I stared at the picture. "I just thought she should be there. She's part of our story too. She always will be." I couldn't speak. I just pulled her into my arms and held her, feeling the tears slide down my cheeks, feeling more love than I had ever thought possible. This was my family, all of them. The living and the remembered, the present and the past, bound together by love. As the years passed, I would look back on that first year as the foundation of everything that came after. The challenges, the joys, the ordinary moments that added up to an extraordinary life. Lucas did become an engineer, just as he had dreamed, specializing in sustainable building design. He created structures that were beautiful and efficient, that worked with nature instead of against it. He told me once that he had learned from his childhood that shelter was the most important thing you could give someone, and he wanted to make sure everyone had access to it. Sophia became a teacher, working with children from disadvantaged backgrounds, children who reminded her of herself at that age. She had a gift for reaching kids who had given up, for seeing potential where others saw problems. Her mother's resilience lived on in her. Lily became a nurse, specializing in pediatric care, bringing comfort to sick children and their families in their darkest moments. She said it was because of Clara, because Clara had shown her that caring for others was the most important work anyone could do. And Clara and I grew old together, watching our grandchildren play in the same garden where we had first begun to fall in love, where two frightened children had once looked for safety and found a home instead. Sometimes I still visited Rebecca's grave, bringing flowers, sharing updates, thanking her for the life she had given me and the life she had made possible after she was gone. Clara came with me sometimes, and sometimes I went alone, and both felt right. Because love doesn't end with death, it transforms, it grows. It finds new expressions and new recipients and new ways of manifesting in the world. I had loved Rebecca with everything I had, and her loss had nearly destroyed me. But Clara had taught me that the heart is not a finite vessel with limited space. It is more like the universe itself, capable of endless expansion, capable of holding more than we ever thought possible. That is the truth I discovered in the abandoned house in the woods. That is the truth that changed everything. Love prevails. Always. Over grief and loss and fear. Over poverty and abandonment and despair. Over every obstacle the world can throw at us. Love prevails. And that is the only truth that matters.